Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's installment of the Supervisors in Government Community of Practice virtual networking discussion. Welcome in. We'll give everybody a moment or two to join us and get settled here. As we're waiting, we invite you to participate, whoever's in here with us already, in a little bit of an icebreaker with us. Our topic of conversation today is active listening. So we want to hear from you again as everyone's joining quickly. How do good listeners make you feel? I think most of us have someone in our lives that we can think of quickly who is a good listener. How do they make us feel? All right, here we're off and running here. Validated, heard and valued, supported, heard. Yes, seen and heard. Connected. Oh, I love this. Cared about. Emily or John, what do you think of when you think of a good listener in your life?
I think when I think of a good listener, I think it's someone who's paying attention, and that maybe they agree, maybe they disagree with me, but if you did like a pop quiz later on, they would know what you said. And I think there's a real power in someone who pays attention.
I love
Yeah, I
that.
feel real warm and fuzzy, you know. You just kind of get that feeling of like, yeah, hey, someone cares. Someone's actually, giving me their attention. It's like that is so cool.
Mhm. Agreed. There's some really great answers in here. Trust, empathy, psychologically safe. We love that term around here. Valued. Excellent. I can see some themes emerging here. So thank you so much for contributing in the chat. And let's get started. So welcome again to Supervisors in Government Community of Practice. Those of you who have been with us before, you might have perked up. Maybe you noticed a little change in the intro here. We're pivoting from new supervisors in government community of practice to supervisors in government community of practice. We realize this is a really robust group with lots of levels of different experience. So we want to make it feel inclusive. You don't have to be new to your supervisory or management role to be here. You just have to have an interest in supervisory roles and management in government. So welcome back if you've been with us before, and welcome in if this is your first time. So as a reminder, my name is Leah Anderson. I'm the digital marketing director here at GovLoop. Some housekeeping reminders for you as well. We do have an active chat. If you've already seen, we invite you to put questions and comments in there. We'll be keeping an eye on that. So please use that to stay engaged with us and your fellow attendees. It's been very active, so we appreciate you guys commenting in there. Today is a really special day for this community of practice because I'm joined by two friends and colleagues as our speakers. So I have Emily Jarvis here with me today, who's our senior online and events editor, and also John Monroe, who's our director of content at GovLoop. So I'm super excited to talk to you both today about a really interesting topic. Let's get straight into it because we have a lot of ground to cover. You guys ready? Okay,
Let's do
excellent.
it.
Excellent. So we like to start broad around here and get a nice, level playing field of understanding around the topic at hand. So my first question for you both is what are the defining characteristics of active listening?
All right, well, let's start by talking about what's the purpose of active listening. When is it handy? And really what active listening is about is helping a person express themselves more clearly. In some cases, it's actually helping a person realize what they actually feel or what they think, because that's when active listening becomes important. It's like there's something going wrong, something has gone amiss, and they're struggling to talk about it. That's when we can shift into active listening mode and kind of help them through that process. And so, a couple things. One, active listening is really about providing a listening presence. As the listener, we're kind of pulling ourselves back where it's not about what we think, it's not about experiences that we've had that are similar. It's really about kind of helping the person talk. And really, you're doing active listening when you're listening more than talking. That's a really good thing. And also, like I said, we set aside our opinions. If we have experiences that are similar, they can help us connect with the person, but they don't need to hear about our experiences, because this is about them, not about us. And I would say just a big part of this is really about minimize distractions, give the person your full attention.
Yeah.
Emily.
I, it's always hard to follow John because he is probably the person that I think does this best that I've met in my entire life because I have attention problems. So I try and think like 6 or 7 steps ahead all the time. And that just creates such a bad precedent. Like if I'm thinking through what I think John is going to say or what I think John should say, I'm doing both myself and the person who's speaking a disservice. So when I think of the characteristics of active listening, I think of shutting off my own brain and anything other than being a receptor of information. And that is a skill. And it is a skill you have to really work on if you have a brain like mine. And I think a lot of us have developed these habits. You have your phone right next to you. You have your probably Teams or some sort of chat up right now. Your email's probably up right now. So, in a world of distraction, to actually really focus on what the other person is saying is incredibly difficult, but I think it's more important than ever.
Let me give one quick tip because Emily, you made a good point. It's so easy for us to kind of start thinking ahead and kind of step on the person's toes, say, oh, well, and kind of interrupt them. And that's so natural. It's so human, And so one thing that we can do is if we catch ourselves doing that, just actually kind of saying step back and saying, oh, sorry, no, you were saying, and kind of re-prompting them because it is very natural to jump ahead. I do that all the time. And it's like, not so good.
I like that. I think that's really helpful, John, of what you're suggesting about re-prompting, because that element of relating, like, you have a friend venting, oh, my boss did XYZ today was really hard. Like immediately you want to relate to that with like, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. I know what you're talking about. I know what you're but now the topic of the conversation's shifted to my experience, not yours. So I think the re-prompting is so helpful to get back on track to be a really good listener. So I like that one a lot. I'm going to put that in my back pocket here. So on that note, tips and how we can stay on track as an active listener. How do you know, or how do we know if we're doing active listening correctly? How do we know we're achieving what we want to?
So, here's a main point I'd make about active listening is all about emotions. We're going to end up in doing active listening when someone is having some feelings around an issue, around an experience, it gets that kind of emotionally charged. And so one of the most important things that we can do as a listener is kind of get in tune with the emotions of another person and showing them that we're in tune. And so here's a simple example of doing that. Let's say Emily is talking about, she had this tough experience at, picking up her child at daycare,
Mm.
and just something that just went wonky with that. And she sounds really frustrated. I might say, wow, that sounds really frustrating. And when Emily hears that, that's that validation. And that's that sort of invitation to say more. And that's the thing that happens so often is if you kind of reflect back to someone kind of their own experiences, there's that sense of trust and they're going to share more. Now, one thing I would say about that though is we always have to be tentative because I really don't know what Emily feels. I may be misinterpreting. And so you're always making it kind of a tentative thing, giving Emily an opportunity to correct me, saying, no, it's not, I'm not really frustrated. I just feel like, whatever. And it's like, okay. And again, that's not a bad thing. That correction, that's actually a good thing. It's like, okay, we're on the same page. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is, you're doing active listening well when the person keeps digging deeper. When they kind of share a certain point and you kind of offer reflection back and they take it down another 2 levels. That's when it's working. And I would say the other thing is often one of the most beautiful things to see is when someone's talking and you're kind of interacting with them and you can tell they're getting some clarity for themselves. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And that's when you can see the emotions sort of settling down and things are getting processed. And it's just wonderful.
You're
Yeah.
just so excitable, John. I do have a question for you, though. I know I'm throwing this whole thing off of our planned speech here, but John, as you were talking, it got me thinking about the boundary between a supervisor and your
Mhm.
employee, right? Because you're
Yes.
talking about matching their emotion or trying to figure it
Yeah.
out and being there to listen to them, but we're still in a professional space. So I'm curious, how do you kind of toe that line? And I'd be curious what our audience thinks too. But how do you toe the line between listening to someone, allowing them the space to vent, but still being in that professional space of some
Mm.
kind?
Yeah, that is a good question. And that's a very valid question. I think I think the good news is in most cases, when we're doing active listening in the workplace, and if you're doing it as a supervisor, your employee is most likely to kind of recognize that boundary.
Hmm.
Um, if they don't, if it kind of takes on that twist, and I've been in that situation, and I would say I give grace.
Mm.
Because keep in mind, often, there's sort of when people are communicating, when they're stressed, when they're emotional, they're communicating on two levels. The one level is the words. The below that is sort of the emotion, the real issue. And sometimes they don't always align. Sometimes the words are just getting supercharged with emotions and maybe in inappropriate ways in a professional setting. And when that's happened to me, and like I said, it's happened, I just give grace.
Yeah.
It's like, that's okay. I just try to help them work through that to get past that point.
Yeah.
That's
I
a good.
think too, someone said in your earlier prompt, Leah, about the icebreaker that we need to be psychologically safe in order to have these conversations. You're like, what the prompt was, what was it? Like something like, how do you know you're in a active listening conversation or something like that? And someone said being psychologically safe. I think, John, that's what you're talking about too.
Yeah.
You've got this environment in which tempers may flare for a second or two, but you know you're in a space where that can be processed effectively.
Yeah, and for our part, it's really always trying to listen to what's going on beneath that emotional outburst and almost setting that aside. I actually had a case where an employee yelled at me. They got really worked up and they yelled at me, and I knew why they were yelling at me. There was a sense of, there was other stuff going on. And so we just like kind of moved through that. And he later apologized. And I'm like, it's like, that's okay. We got through it. It does take time to build up that psychological safety, but it can be done. It
Mhm.
happens.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a topic that does up a lot, particularly in this group. It's almost like any topic we talk about, always there's always some element of psychological safety that has to exist for things to go well. So it comes up a lot, but when you're talking about it, a sign of active listening going well, people are willing to go deeper. I think that's also a good indicator of psychological safety. So these pieces all kind of fit together is what I'm sensing. I love seeing the comments. I'm going to address some of those in a second, but I'm going to move on to the next question at the same time here. We're kind of touching on this with the last question, but why is active listening such a critical skill for managers and supervisors, especially in the context of our government community here? Why should we care? Why should we try to be good at active listening if we're a supervisor or in a management position?
I would say I think the most obvious answer, at least for me, is to better understand the people who are working for us and the problems that they might have and the information that they have. There is a lot of change happening right now in the government space. A lot of it is kind of being articulated in a lot of different venues, and some of it is pertinent to certain employees, some of it isn't. And I think active listening to our teams and to the concerns that they have and to the challenges that they're experiencing gives us real insight that then we can take up to maybe more senior leaders and say, hey, this isn't making sense or this isn't resonating with our team. Because I think without having that active listening component, we really don't know what's going on with folks. And if you don't know what's going on with your team, that's going to lead to a lot of potential problems down the road.
Mhm.
Yeah, yes, Emily, that's beautiful. Because, here's the thing. This sounds very touchy-feely. This is not touchy-feely. If I have an employee who's in a tough place, they're having trouble with some issue. Maybe it's me, maybe it's something about, the larger environment, whatever it is. If they're struggling with that, they're not their best selves. As a supervisor, I want everyone on my team to be kind of their best selves, to feel sort of that they can do their work, that they can, really go at it. And if they're struggling, if they're stuck someplace, they're not going to do that. And here's the thing, I talk about emotions. This happens to all of us. Something happens and we kind of get into a tailspin, and it's like we're not effective in that situation. And if we can help someone get out of a tailspin, A, they're going to be able to do their job well. B, that's going to pay off down the road as they become more engaged, as you've created that psychological safety. And like I said, they kind of become their best selves.
Mhm. I think that's a key word there, John, too. The engaged employee, engaged person, that's a result of feeling heard, feeling valued, feeling respected too. So a lot of the words that came up with our little icebreaker today, how do you feel when you're with a good listener? I think that's also the answer to this question. Maybe we want people to feel that way at work whenever possible. There's some really great comments in the chat here too. Larissa is saying, I like the saying, listen to understand, not to respond. I think that's such a good sort of motto for active listening. That one's really good to take note of, making sure employees feel seen and heard. I like that. We have a recommendation here for 5 secrets of communication. Keep sharing those resources. That's really helpful for this whole group here. And we will link to some resources too in our follow-up email for tomorrow. I also just want to note just something interesting. I think as we're talking about active listening in the context of this group, supervisors, managers, this government space, this session was very popular. I think we're seeing the highest registration for this session than we have in months. So it's just interesting. I think this group definitely values active listening. And I think what's really exciting is the next question here. So the more that we learn about it here as supervisors and managers, hopefully, we pass this on to your teams as well. So that's our next question. How can I encourage my team members to also practice active listening? So I want to talk about the modeling part of it. That's a leading question now, but I think you guys can handle it. So Emily, what do you think?
Yes, obviously, I think you want to model the behavior that you want to see from your employees themselves. Um, John's favorite phrase, and I'm probably stealing his shine here, is tell me more. I went to journalism school. That's what my degree's in. How I ended up at GovLoop, questions will forever abound. But the number one rule in my journalism classes was you always end every single interview that you do with the question, what should have I asked you that I didn't? And that's my favorite way to engage with folks, as well. And it's just a really simple question that you can tack on to any situation. I think when you have these conversations, it makes it seem like active listening is almost a therapy session. Like we're sitting down in a one-on-one and it's a really formal type of thing. And I don't think that is necessarily the case. And in most opportunities, for these conversations, they're happening at random. You're walking down the hall, it's at the end of a meeting, and everybody is just hanging out still in the conference room. And I think those are great opportunities to just say, what don't I know? What should I know that I don't know right now? And I think it gives such an opportunity for folks to have a voice in discussions that maybe they wouldn't have brought something up before. So I think that's how you encourage folks to have more active conversations, by asking for it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I really like that approach to it, that these things don't have to happen in a very formal setting, like a one-on-one, a performance review, whatever it might be, but different times during the day. And like you're saying, walking down the hall. So I think that's really helpful to think of, because I think traditionally I don't think of it that way. It seems very formal, that just a direct conversation, but I think that's a really good point. And John, what do you think?
Yeah, so I want to talk about that tell me more because yes, that's one of my favorite phrases, and I'll explain why in a second. But let's talk about this more sort of random light touch, because here's something that happens. You're in a meeting and that involves multiple people, including say one of your staffers, and you can tell they're irritated or you can tell they're frustrated, whatever it is. What can happen is after that meeting, say, hey, can I talk to you for a sec? Hey, I can tell it sounds like you're getting a little frustrated. Can you tell me about that? Okay, so here's the beauty of saying, tell me more or tell me about that, is you're not telling them what to say. You're not pointing them in any direction. All you're doing is you're observing. Step one is you're observing. Seems like you're getting kind of frustrated in there. Maybe it seems like you got kind of quiet. And what's going on? Asking a question that gives the speaker the opportunity to decide where to go with that. Because if you try to assume too much about why they went silent, you're kind of quiet in there. Is it because, blah, blah, blah? Well, suddenly they're responding to your agenda. But if you just say, tell me more, tell me about that, then they can take it where it needs to go. And often just doing that kind of light touch base, it can resolve things without a lot of to do, or you'll discover, wow, there's a whole lot more there that we do need to address. And back to that kind of the question of, this isn't a therapy session, and that's right, because the idea of when we do this active listening, it helps someone kind of work through something. You get to the point and says, okay, let's talk about next steps. The idea is you get through whatever it is, and then you get back to business, and you can get back to business because there's kind of a resolution there.
Mhm.
But tell me more it's a magic phrase. It's just magic happens.
We have firsthand experience, Emily. We know how helpful that is in discussions, and not just one-on-one, but just discussions at large too. I think it really is inviting of a lot of different people also to contribute. So it does work.
Oh, and on modeling, so also a nice phrase to kind of keep things sort of, light is like, hey, sounds like, yeah, if someone like says, okay, I'm really frustrated because, well, let me be a sounding board. Let's just kind of chat and I'll be your sounding board. Sounding board is such light language, neutral language. We all kind of know what that means. And we can turn to someone in our own case. Like if we're feeling kind of like, you can say, hey, I need a sounding board. Can we just sort of chat and let me just give a chance to work through my thoughts? Do that with someone and they begin to kind of get the idea of like, oh, this is actually feasible. And as a supervisor, if we use someone else as a sounding board, if we do it appropriately, that creates that safety.
Yep, 100%. And Alicia, I want to thank you for your comment here saying I like to thank people when they are sharing with me. I think that's really helpful. Again, acknowledging the effort sometimes that goes into communicating honestly and openly. That's not maybe the easiest thing for everybody to do. So I think that's a really good point. Alicia's saying I'll do this when I ask for feedback and when feedback is given without being prompted. It increases trust between me and others and helps them feel more comfortable to come to me for nearly any reason. That's such
Ooh,
a
let's talk
beautiful
about that
thing.
feedback piece. That's
Yeah.
another magic moment for tell me more. Because if
Mhm,
someone gives you some unsolicited feedback, and if it
mhm.
kind of catches you off guard, where you kind of have your brain suddenly kind of freezes up. It's like, oh, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? tell me more is basically a time killer. You know, you're basically able to say, tell me more about that while you kind of are, you know, your brain is, you know, the squirrel in your brain is running on the wheel, you know, as you process that. So when by the time they finish talking, you're kind of, you know, you're ready to engage. So that's also a neat trick.
Yeah, it's like a multi-purpose, wonderful little phrase. But I have to say too, I think sometimes I've even heard you use it in my experience when maybe I'm in a meeting and like stuck on a point or I can't get something out articulately. It's almost like you're buying me a little bit more
Yes,
time, but
that's right.
you're inviting me to finish my thought and kind of giving me the space to do that instead of
Yes,
being like, I don't know, you know what I mean? So
yes.
I've seen it in action and it's wonderful. We have another couple prompts here from William. That's interesting. Why would you ask that? What
Yeah, yeah.
say that? Yeah, it sounds like we have some active listening practitioners in here already. Wonderful. Not shockingly, but surprisingly, we're already at our last question here. Um, but I think this one's super important. So again, we have a lot of people here on the call with us today. Everybody is interested in active listening and doing it well. So let's talk about how we can make active listening a part of our everyday leadership style. So again, we don't want to save it just for formal one-on-one, conversations. How do we really incorporate it into our day-to-day as supervisors or managers?
So I think Larissa put it in, and it's something actually that my therapist tells me all the time in dealing with my husband, not with my work colleagues, but with my husband. She always says you need to listen to understand because you can't respond without understanding. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm right. I know that he is not doing what he said he's supposed to do or whatever. She's like, but that is the antithesis of the problem, right? You are assuming a whole lot of things into fact that might be right and they might not be right, but until you hear their side of the story, you don't really have all of the information. And so I think the first thing you really need to do if you're going to make active listening a big part of your reality is practice quieting your mind when someone else is talking to you. And quieting your mind means not multitasking, which is almost impossible. It feels like this these days when efficiency is the key kind of term that you're throwing out there, right? We want to be as efficient as possible. And so multitasking seems like it's going to be the right step, but it oftentimes slows us really down. And so, making a really concentrated effort to focus on that mindfulness piece and to quiet your own self before you engage in these conversations. And like John said, not assume you know what the folks are going to say on the receiving end, but really kind of listen for the context and the story that they're telling.
I like that. Yep. Quieting our minds. It's a practice skill, but we
Mm-hmm.
can do. John, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to go back to this idea of one thing that we can just train ourselves to do is always listening for those signs that something is up, that
Mhm.
something isn't being said. And that may be a raised voice, that may be someone speaking a little more emphatically than seems appropriate. That could be someone who keeps circling back to a topic. So, like if you're having a conversation with a staffer and they've come back to the same kind of observation or point like for the third time, that's what when it comes to active listening, there's this idea of you follow the thread. Well, that tells you there's a thread there and you need to explore it. So anytime when you see any of those that kind of that emotionally charged, the emphatic, the circling back, that means there's something there to kind of check out. And we can really train ourselves to always kind of be keeping our eyes and ears open, always just listening for those telltale signs because they work.
Yeah, I like that. Well, we are at time, you guys. This always goes by so quickly, but I think we did cover a lot of ground here. I appreciate both of your insights, and sharing openly with us your experience with active listening. Like I said, I know that there's a bunch of interest in this topic, so we will share related resources with you all. This is a topic I think we want to, keep in the fold here at GovLoop as well. So we will definitely continue the conversation on this. And I encourage everyone in this group to continue the conversation. It's another reminder that we do have a LinkedIn group available to everyone here, so feel free to connect and ask questions there. And I hope you will all join us in exactly 1 month from now for our next virtual discussion for supervisors in government, where we will be talking about fostering creativity on your team. So thanks again to my coworkers and friends. I appreciate you being here with me today, and thank you so much to everyone on this call with us. We appreciate your time. We see the work you're doing in government, and we'll see you in a month.
Bye.